All right, so let's begin the discussion for threats. So under threats, I'm going to go through what are the different ways in which threats are implemented in the OS. Most people will be end users. That is, maybe you go online and you find out this is how Java does threats. But as a computer scientist or IT person, it's good to understand the main design issues when it comes to threats. I know you code a lot, but in this class we'll be discussing how things are done. So those who are wondering how did something get done, if you have enough time, you could implement one yourself. Or if you join a project where they are working on this in the back end, you can understand the issues in the back, right? Or maybe you could be someone who is in a position to purchase or decide what technology to use. At the very least, if you understand some of the things in the background, you can make better decisions for yourself, right? So we need to understand how are threats actually implemented. Right? Now, previously we talked about having processes, and a process was simply some executing context. There's some memory, there's a stack, there's some data, there's some code, and there's a program counter that indicates where inside the code you are currently running. Right. So as an example, either with Notepad++. So some people have Notepad++, and in the plugin manager, one of the plugins available is the hex editor. Find the hex editor. So the font is a little bit small, but okay, I think for mine it's installed, so it's in the installed list. Right. So there is what we call a hex editor, and what will happen is when you open an actual program, some program that you have, some exe, you can see that there are these numbers that correspond to whatever is in the file. Right? So it means that every program that you have, after you compile it, there is some binary in the background that represents the program. So whenever someone says program counter, it just means which location. So if I highlight anything, it corresponds to some, move to another line. Any place that I click, there is some number code that goes with that location. So as a program is running, every instruction is what? Some number code. So code by code, it starts going through from the first to the last. If you open up anything in a hex editor, you may see some things that look like things you can read, but most of it you can't. For example, this has, try and see if I can zoom in a bit. All right. So for example, this program cannot be run in DOS mode. Right? But a lot of it are things that we can't read. Right? That's why human beings rely on a high-level language like C, C++, Java, and so on. Because we can't write code. Some people can write this, and you can learn the code and write it. But it's very time-consuming to do this. It will take you a long time to be productive. Right? So what happens is, as a program is executing, it goes from one address to the other. And you can see the addresses are arranged, start from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, up to F. So this would be 0, 0, 0, 0. So it's almost like a grid to show you that in each location, each address location, there's some code there, or some instruction. Similarly, if you have a text file, so like this one, and I try to show it in the hex editor, right? You can see that everything, like T, that's A, so everything at all, that's another A. You can see all the A's will have the same code, 61. This is another A, 61. So everything is encoded. The characters you type, the instructions that are being performed, they are all encoded into numbers, right? And every number has an address. So if you hear the word program counter, it just means that what address is the program currently at? So if you see program counter, that's what it means, right? So if you have one process, as you currently usually have, what you are used to, there is just one program counter pointing to some location within the code, right? And that means that if you are doing an if-else, remember an if-else means that what? It's going to decide whether or not to jump. I don't know if you have thought of how if-else works, but that's what it does. It's at a location, it asks itself, should I jump to the next slot or should I wait? But most of your code just runs sequentially. From one address, it goes to the next, to the next, to the next. If a function call is made, it means that what, it must jump from one location to another part in the code. Right? So everything that you are doing is based on the program counter. Right? In the textbook, they tend to use this representation. You may see this a lot. Right? I just drew this one next to it, just so people could put it into some context. That all of this wiggly showing thread, all it means is that there is some executing. I think the line is representing the different ways in which it's executing, like going to different locations. So you can have one thread, meaning that what? There's just one executing context. That's most programs you have. Right now, you write it from the beginning to end. It just runs from beginning to end. Right? So one thread, that's what you have been doing. Right. If you do things like fork, remember we did a fork where the program is cloned. All it means is that when you actually fork, it actually copies your memory or makes a contextual copy, meaning that you can now have two program counters running from a location. But remember, as soon as you forked, usually you do something like if the PID you got was greater than or less than, that means that the PID can then what? Change depending on which program is running. So a fork just means that you are copying your entire process to another location, so you can execute two at once. Right. Now, what we are talking about this week is threading, meaning that if you have some memory, so this diagram is, I think, very important, at least the concept of it, that previously you have stack, heap, and some code. But what you can do is, you can think of, what if you wanted to be able to run just like a human being? If you had two jobs, right? So having one job, now you have two jobs. So now you would have to have maybe two different maybe calendars. One calendar for job 1, another calendar for job 2. So that within each job, you record what you are doing. So when you go to, maybe you are teaching and maybe you are also working or you are also taking a course. When you get to the classroom, you take notes and say, oh, I need to study for this exam, I need to study for a quiz. When you get to work, you have another calendar of events that you are doing. When you get there, you also have to record, okay, now I have to make certain calls, I have to follow up with certain customers. So really what it's doing is, you have still one process, but you would like to keep track of multiple things. That is to be able to run different tasks. In order to do that, there are some duplications that must happen. You must duplicate, remember the registers. So, right. You must be able to have, I know in the text, let me just pull this out. Today I want to make it a little bit more interactive. But, okay, bring this to the front. Alright. So this is how the text visualizes it. That is, inside your program, instead of just having one code, one data, one file, one register, like set of registers, one stack. When you have multiple threads, it means that you have to keep track of multiple variables. And each variable has to be separated from the other. So when you are working, certain things you isolate from what? The things that are at work. Even if you have two mailboxes, you realize you log in, you have a different list. You log in, you have a different list. So it has to somehow separate the variables that you have based on the task you are performing. So if you have 3 different program counters, that means that you have to have 3 different stacks, right? Because anytime you make a function call, it's almost like you put something on a stack to keep track of where your function is. So now, for every thread you have, you must have a separate stack. And the registers are the ones that are being used for doing your normal arithmetic, whether adding, subtracting, dividing. That will also have to be duplicated, so that every thread can execute independently, without affecting the other thread. So it means that anytime he's doing one task, he will look up and say, I'm working with thread 1, these set of registers. And when he moves to the other task, just as you come and maybe switch, you go to work. When you get to work, there's another stack of tasks for you and variables that you're using within that task. If you go to a third task, that means that what? You are going to have another copy of a different stack and registers. Right? Just like notebooks. I think we have notebooks. Everyone has a notebook for every different class. When you get to one class, you pull out one notebook and you start writing. When you get to second class, you pull out the second. But if you come back to your first class, you just go back. You just switch your notebooks. So it's the same process, but all it's doing is multiplexing. That is switching between tasks. But in order to make the switch effective, it's good if you separate out the different, variables that you're using. So the variables are more or less your stack and your registers. So someone had a question?
So how do you know the variables? That means the variables I
Okay, so remember the stack, there are two different types of variables, right? There are stack variables and heap variables. Heap variables are the ones where maybe you declare something like a student class. S is equal to new student. You make a student and you make some changes in it. But there are some variables that maybe you define within a function. So let's, okay, this is too dark. I wish you can just copy it out. Put it All right, this is C#, but nonetheless. So there are some variables, like string and so on. So there are some variables that are declared or declared right into a function, meaning that there are some variables that once you move from this function, you make a function call to another function. You don't have access to that anymore. Those tend to be the stack variables. The heap variables are those variables that when you declare, even when you move from one function to another, they tend to persist. Right. So if you make a student, I think in Java you do this, you create one class and then you pass it by reference, you call it, you pass a parameter, but usually you pass that object to another. It doesn't mean that the object is necessarily being copied or moving. It just means that you are passing a reference to it. So those ones are heap variables, right? But the stack variables are just those ones that, because maybe you are calling one function to another function, it needs to track when it's moving from one function to the next. So it puts those onto a stack. And remember, a stack is like a heap of things, except that it's ordered. You put one on top of the other. Meaning that if you call function 1, function 2, function 3, they build on top. And when you are going back, you just what? Go and pull the things from the stack. That means that you have returned from your function. You can get your data back. That's how come you can call functions, but you don't lose your position where you called. You don't lose your information. When the function call returns, you just continue where you were. It uses a stack mechanism. Okay, so when they talk about multiplexing, we usually mean that all the things are there, and then you are just switching your focus from one to the other. When we talk about swapping, we normally mean that you switch, either you copy some data from one, like a whole thing, memory from one location to another, so that you can run another process, right? So multiplexing, everything is there. So you can think of the way that you are doing multiple programming. Word runs a little bit, Notepad runs a little bit, all may be in memory. But when we say multiplexing, it just means that he's moving from one to the other. To swap, so the only time when swap is used in a text was when it meant it's copying the entire process, maybe from memory to hard disk. And maybe there's too much, there are too many processes in memory, you need to take some out. That's normally when people talk about swapping. But in line with multiplexing, there's what we call context switching. That just means that shifting your focus from one process to another. I mean, yes, Word is running, you want to run maybe Notepad. That's context switching, that you switch from one process to another. So they are slightly different terms. Okay, so back to this. So meaning that now you can start to think of programs and solutions where you don't have just one thing running. You can think of, okay, how can I start implementing solutions where multiple threads, that means multiple processes are running, but they can interact. We did a fork. There wasn't much interaction. On Wednesday, we look at pipes and sockets. Right? Then we also look at, but I think if we add threads, it will be nice so that you can see one process running here, one process running here, and they are communicating. Right now, most of the time, you have to put everything in one block. But we have to start extending the way we think about programs and solutions to ones where things are going to be separated processes or threads, but they have to be able to communicate so you can do more. Now, in order to implement the threads, okay, now I can almost, wish I could go full screen, but I have issues when I switch. The resolution keeps changing. I have to work on this. Okay, so there are different types of threads that exist, right? So you can have threads either in the user level or at the kernel level. Remember that at the user level, you don't have that much permissions, right? That means user processes are running. They can't jump over memory and so on. But within a thread, all the threads will actually share. Okay, so the reason why people like threads is because the threads are all running in the same memory, it is easy to share those heap variables. So you can have maybe a thread that is doing mail, and it knows that, okay, something is doing mailing, something is doing sending, something is checking for calendar, and they are all in one place. So long as they are all in the same memory block, it's easier for them to share information easily than if they were totally separate processes. Right? So now you can see why, of course, it depends on what you are doing. But it's possible to, for one solution, have different implementations. So Firefox, for example, you don't see a lot of creating for each tab a different process. But Chrome does that, and they have implemented it and made sure that it works. So you can copy, paste, you can open, everything works. But for Firefox, what they are doing is they have multiple threads that are running that are handling the different tabs. And for them also, they have what they will claim their advantages. So you don't have to necessarily say, just because I've told you to use fork, everything you do in life now, you have to do fork. It's not required. Right? Just look at the context that you are asked to sort of create your solution in, and make some decisions for yourself. Right? As you can see, Windows, Linux, they are all what? Everybody's coding, different languages, different contexts, but they are all providing solutions. So in this case, you don't need to share the memory. All you need to do is what? Create the variable that's in a heap, and then pass from one location to the other, and the other one can read it. Right? So if, for example, I have an array, right? Remember that in the process, when you do a fork, after the fork, everybody has the variable and can what? Can access it. So if I've created some variables and I create threads, those threads can all access the variables that are at the class level. So for example, we'll do this more on Wednesday, but let me just see if I can make very tiny. Oh, now I'm starting from scratch. I have to go and copy all my files. I don't even have projects. Oh, this is serious. I can't do anything. Is this really happening to me? Okay, just a sec. New project. Okay, this is... I think I should have brought my charger. I would have been faster. But in Java, right, when you create maybe a class. Let me just make a fake one. So we'll just... Right. And I have maybe... If I have some function somewhere, such as right, it's possible to, for example, do if student is equal to now, right? That just means that this student that I've written, so it won't change your coding by much. This student that I've written refers to the student that I declared outside. It's just a way of sharing. So in this case, if two different threads were running this function, they would all be sharing the variable that's pointed to by this variable. So when it's threads, it just means that what? Multiple things are going to be running in the same space. And that means if you declare a variable, everyone can see the variable. But of course, if I did something like int I, this is only in this function, right? This variable can't be seen outside of this. But that means in order to share, when you have threads, all they do is they simply declare variables such that what? If it were another program, from one function to another, they can see it. But that means that in a thread as well, they can see all the things that are global to the function. The only danger with threads is once you start to do this, then you have to worry if something does someone does something like student.name equals Kofi or maybe Kwabena. Right? Because now, if they are all going to be sharing the variables, if they are not careful, they will clobber each other. Right? That's, I mean, the main danger with threads. As if you have now multiple things that are going to be running, sharing all these variables. Even for the shared memory for processes, they have to be careful. Right? You have to make sure that you don't overwrite the other. And normally you'd have some extra variables to keep track of. Okay, who currently has this? Or who currently uses this? That is the next chapter after that one, after this. That's synchronization. Making locks. So a lock is a special data structure that will allow you to hold on. You can check to see who owns this, or do I have the right to proceed? Right. So your coding will change. All we'll do is we'll add for Java we'll add runnable. So there is a Java class that you can implement so that your class can instantly be able to run multiple versions of itself, right? All sharing the variables that are there. Right? So that means a program can be running, it can send off and say, you go and do registration for one class, you go and do registration for another class. So you can actually, I think that would be a good example to try with this one. Multiple registrations be happening on behalf. But guess what? Making threads, that will do the registrations for different things. Right? So back to, right. So you can have, okay, so if you have a multiple core machine, let me see if I can find, where's my thread manager? Yeah. I'm going to start my task manager. Hopefully it starts. Right. If you have a multi-core machine, let me see if this one can show you which CPU each is running on. Description company. Okay, this one doesn't show which processor is running on. There are some versions of this which show which processor it's running on. Right, this doesn't show it. Okay, there is no, there is affinity. Okay, set affinity, right? So even though processes are running, oh, why permission denied for who me? Okay, let me try. Run as admin. Oh. This is very serious. Task. Right. Let me see if I can run this as administrator. Run. Be good. Okay. No, I'm not allowed. I don't know why it's not allowing me to do that. Okay. So even though I'm listing many processes, if you have maybe 4 cores, it means that some of them may be running at the same time. Really running at the same time. But some of them, you may not be able to tell if they're running at the same time or not. Because the speed of, even though, for example, I can minimize this is also another process that's running. As far as we are concerned, the speeds at which these are going, we can't really tell when one is running or the other is running. So in that sense, even when we do a fork, right, if you do a fork, definitely they will be what? It will be possible if you have a multi-core machine for it to run on different cores. So one can be on one core, one can be on another core. And that's how you can get speed up. As opposed to you just have one program that's stuck to one core. Right? For threads, if you want to be able to have that parallelism, that capability to really run on different cores. Parallelism, I didn't say it properly. Okay, alright. So if you want to have that parallelism, that means that you will like to have the help of the kernel to pull this off. Right? For normal user processes, it's very difficult to just say thread 1 run on this core, thread 2 run on this core. Usually you need the kernel's help, since it's the one that is dispatching different processes to different cores. So that's the benefit of having 2 different processes. Or you find a library, a thread library, that says that, oh, we can support running the threads on different processes. So you have to actually check. That's why I'm saying that it's good you are taking this class. So you learn some of the issues. So if you're going to be implementing a project, you have to ask them, okay, we are doing threads. What thread library do we use? What features does it support? Right. So remember when multi-core, like quad-core, dual-core came at first, they used to say, oh, you may not feel the benefits until the developers have written code that will take advantage of it. And that means we have to, as developers, find out which thread libraries support which features. But usually what happens is, when something comes, like Java, the people in Java will try to make sure that they can take advantage of the OS so that they are competitive. Windows, when they are doing their .NET, will try to make sure that, okay, we can take advantage of the multiple cores. So currently at this point, I think a lot of people will take advantage of the multiple cores. also assign the...
Yeah, so view... No, on the main thing.
Okay, on the top itself.
No, yes, sorry. View.
Oh, view.
Yes. Then system information. Very good.
Okay.
CPU. Is that it?
Okay, I only have 2 cores. Right. Alright, so supposedly every core is doing its own thing. Right. So there are different loads. I think it's doing a graph. Even though it has 2 cores, it's also doing hyper-threading, meaning that each core is pretending to run 2 things at once. So it actually looks like I have 4 cores. But they are not all physical cores. Some of them is just switching between processes. So every core is running something. There used to be, I think it's still there, it's just that I don't have the permissions to do that for some reason. If you have a process, you should be able to right-click and set affinity. Oh, today's is here. Okay, so what set affinity does is you can specify which of the cores your process would like to run on. Right. So if there are 4, so you could say, okay, I would like to make sure that Notepad 1 runs on core 1, Notepad 2 runs on core 2. And then this means that you are taking control of the scheduling yourself. Right. And you are not relying on the OS. But the OS, usually, we trust that the OS will, as you look at the chart, it will try to spread the work between the different, cancel. Hey, no, it's not canceling. Are you fighting? Okay. Yeah. Alright, so that's the CPU. So you can see that the OS is doing a pretty good job of trying to keep things rather even between the cores. So normally we leave the OS alone to do the scheduling. Right? You just leave the OS alone. Alright. So now if you have different types of, so there's an assignment more. It's not really an assignment. As you read the text, you see it. That is, there are P threads, Windows threads, and Java threads. And I'm saying, how do you create a thread for POSIX? POSIX is like the Linux compliant. POSIX, Windows, and Java. If you read the chapter 2, you see examples there. It's just something I read before you come on Wednesday, so that when we dive in, it's easier for you. Right. Now, in order to implement, there are a few ways to do this. One is you can have a many-to-one approach. Right. That is, the kernel can be there, and as different things are coming up, I left something out. Yeah, I left something out. As different threads require, so the users will be saying, I want to run a thread, I want to run a thread. All that the kernel will be doing is, it will have a few kernel threads, and then it will be swapping out the contents. It's almost like when you do execlp, replacing one content with another. But I'll just be swapping the different user threads. So your thread will run a little bit, my thread will run a little bit, his thread will run a little bit. So that's the first one, where the kernel has a thread. So the kernel sets up a thread, and we'll be swapping the different user threads that are coming in. That's one approach. Another approach, okay, so remember previously, what the kernel has to do is, it has to swap processes, right? So it takes one thing that is running and switches it with another thing, right? Now, that means at the thread level, if the kernel implements threads, right, instead of just swapping out one process for another, what it can do is, it can be swapping out thread context with another thread context, right? So that if there are multiple threads that are running, it can be, even though you think that all the threads are independent, what's happening at the very bottom is, the same way you have processes, the kernel is swapping out your threads. So run this thread for a while, run this thread for a while, run this thread for a while. The same way it runs one process for a while. So a process can have, like your process and my process, they could be swapped. But if within my process, I have created multiple threads, right? That means that the kernel will be handling switching one thread with another, So let's go here. Maybe this will be better. So you realize that everyone, you have a heap, you have a stack, and so on. What the kernel will do is, it will handle switching from one thread to another. So that's one process, having multiple threads. But the kernel will be handling switching from one thread to the other, Similar to switching processes, how the kernel would say, okay, your process has run enough, let me switch to another process. And it moves yours from the CPU, gives it to another person. But in this case, it's the same program that's running, right? Except that within that program, now there are 2 or 3 program counters. That means 2 different lines of execution. So what the kernel will do is, even though that process is running, you can be swapping from one to the other to the other. It has to swap between these. So you don't just let one thread run all the time. You can be switching between the different levels, between the different lines of execution at different parts of the code. Right. Now, so this is the first one, very simple, right? Where let's say one user will be assigned to one kernel, and then you'll be swapping along the way. But there's another one where you can say, let me have a mapper in the middle, where if you come, so I'll have multiple kernel threads, meaning that, so you realize this is a little bit more compared to sort of doing this, or even one-to-one. One-to-one is the simplest, where you say, every time there's a user, just assign it, or every time there's a process, assign it to a kernel to run, a kernel thread to run. But if you go a little bit further, you can see that if we are able to have, so now it's almost like maybe you are going to a library, but instead of saying everybody is always tied to a certain chair, now we can sort of multiplex. Whoever gets there first and we want to run, we can assign a group of user threads to a group of kernel threads. Means that we can now decide, not that it has to always be, the first thread always runs on the first kernel thread. Depending on how they are running, that is, maybe someone is doing a lot of work, someone is doing a lot of CPU, someone is doing a lot of I/O, you can what? Assign them as the work becomes necessary. Right? So maybe you are doing something that does audio. One person is doing the bass, one person is doing the treble, one person is doing some mixing. If bass is not necessary, you don't have to assign it. But there will be other user threads that you could assign. So I intentionally made them different numbers. 3 here and 4 more at the top. Meaning that you don't always have to have this all to one or one to one. You can have a group of users that are assigned to a group of kernel threads. Are people seeing the point? Right. Or if, let's say you have a web server, maybe that one, since most people have done web, they like that one. If you have a web server, and your web server has been 4 cores, and you have millions of users that are logging in, if they are currently 10, if I click a web page, you run my process on maybe core 1, and then it ends. Someone will run on core 2, core 3. But there are only 4 cores. That for all the users, it's what? Allowing, depending on who wants to run, running them on the different cores that are available. Right. But for the thread version, it just means that the kernel has all these threads. Right? It doesn't have to be, and this can make you seem like there are so many threads that are available, but there aren't that many. It could be 2 or 3 or 4. Right? But all it's going to do is anytime you request to run something, he doesn't have to create a whole new thread or everything. He just what? He just swaps. The same way he's doing for processes. You swap one with the other. Right? And the swapping process, all he needs to do is, if he looks at your process, you have some resources, you have a stack, you have some data and some code. If you are swapping and the threads are within the same space, right? So that means if within this program, from thread 1 to thread 2, the only thing I need to swap is what? Tell you, okay, you don't need to run this code anymore, move to the code for the second one. And that's your stack, that's your heap. Right? So this swapping from one thread to another, it's relatively very lightweight compared to swapping a process. To swap a process, if you are not careful and the process is not in memory, you may have to what? Go to the hard disk, bring it in, all of that. But if it is just for a thread, they are all the same. It's almost like, don't have very kosher examples. Trying to find an example, that won't be so annoying. Let's say you are at a computer and you are doing some work, and you wanted to switch from typing to working on Excel. You don't have to log out and log in again. It knows it's you. So you just click and you move. But the moment someone else, if the concept was someone else was coming entirely, you would have to log off. And that means a lot of work. And then the other person has to log in. So if you have a thread, you can actually switch between tasks in a very lightweight fashion. Because all it would be is to say, okay, let me move from this program counter, that's this location code, to another location code, and tell you, okay, now you're using this stack and this heap. Very quick, because it's the same process. You didn't have to move memory or anything. Or you didn't even have to assign a different process ID. Same process ID, but different threads that are running in there. So you just change where the location of what is running. So your question, there are 2 people, so I don't know if ladies first or boys first. Or gentlemen first. Okay, so really what happens is a thread will enable a process to work on multiple things at once. Normally, a process just has one location within the code where it's running, right? But in order to do threads, that means that now the code will keep track of multiple locations so that it can work on multiple tasks. So it runs this line for a while. Maybe it's running, going through sequence by sequence. And you say, I want to run another thread. That means you start with a different location, doing a different task. All of them is one process, but are under one process. Right? So that's a lot like normal human beings. When we are working on tasks, we think of one thing and then we think of something else. And we bookmark it somewhere in our minds. Okay, I'll think of this later. And you think of your current task until you finish it. Right? So you are sort of switching. You are the same person. But all you are doing is you are switching from thinking about one thing for a while to think about another thing, thinking about another thing. Right. So your question? Okay, so right now, the current most popular libraries are available: pthreads, Windows threads, and Java threads. Since you guys are already into Java, we'll start off with the Java ones, right? But all the languages that you have, most of them have some libraries that will enable you to create threads. If you worked for Java, that's one day you go and work for Java, then if they were making a Java virtual machine for Windows, you'd be the one who go and ask, okay, Windows, what does Windows support in terms of the OS? What system calls are available? So that when the person calls the Java code, your Java virtual machine can then what? Make the necessary calls to the operating system to provide that functionality to the higher level code. Right? So that means all of these, all they will do is, in order for Java to exist, so for example, some cell phones now don't have Java virtual machines. Well, some of them do. Like, I'm not advertising, but a lot of the Windows ones, they used to have Java virtual machines on them. So you could run Java code on them. I think I have to check with the Androids. But that just means that if someone wanted to run the Java code on that mobile device, someone has to take the time to figure out, anytime this system call is made, what does the OS have to do? Right? So you would have to, if you are the service provider, decide how the behavior would sort of be exhibited if you are doing either for Linux or for Windows or for Java. We saw this when we were doing we were coding the fork program. Some people were trying to compile in Windows and it wasn't compiling, right? And that just meant that it doesn't mean that Windows is incapable of doing fork. It just means that nobody has yet implemented fork that way for Windows. So when you make the fork call, it didn't exist. But when you go to Linux, same code, you compile, it works. And that's because in Linux, maybe someone has made a library and has made that function, right? That responds to it. So for threads as well, whether for pthreads, Windows threads, or Java threads, these different people have to make sure that on the machine on which it's installed, when you make the system call, you can what? Call the appropriate lower level code to handle it. Right? So like a wrapper for the code.
Initially, you made this comparison with Chrome and Firefox, where I think Chrome runs various processes
for the different tabs. Yes.
Yeah, Firefox. What's that advantage?
So, as I said, if you are all running in the same space, that is.
That's with the
right. So, if you are all running in the same space, if all threads are running in the same space, the sharing will be much easier to do. Right. That is, you can easily share resources from one thread to another. If you have different processes, of course, now you are all isolated, which is good for security. But the issue is sharing may become a little bit more of an issue. And context switching, the person doing this, having multiple threads, hopefully is going to save on context switching. Because he doesn't have to copy, even if there are multiple pieces of code, he doesn't have to worry about, I have to copy all this code to another process before I start running. Right? But of course, the argument is these days everyone has extra CPU anyway. I mean, there are arguments for and against. So both companies are running just fine. So obviously, both models are sustained by the market. Right. Okay, so the last approach is we can have in one kernel, a mixture of both approaches, where for some user level activities, it assigns to just one thread and says you run on this thread always. Or for some of them, it would allow you to share several kernel threads among several user threads. Right. So when I say sharing, it just means that when it's ready to run this, it will just see if the kernel has a thread available. A thread just means that there's some space, it has a stack, a heap, and it will just put your contents in there and run on your behalf. I mean, that's what is happening all the time. The OS is just taking your code, taking your memory, pointing to it, and you run on your behalf. So you can do the same for threads, except that you can't have an infinite number of threads. And so now it has to have some strategies, because you only have a limited number of cores. Maybe you have quad-core or 6-core. If you have more threads than necessary, it means, well, across different processes, you need more switching. Right? So what it can do is, it can have some kernel-level threads. That's some people who are prepared to run empty processes, or in this case, empty spaces within a process. So if a user requests to run, it will swap your content onto one space and run it on your behalf. I think this would be nice once we start coding. Okay, so let's wrap up the issues and give a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and look at just a little bit of code. But code based on Java. So we'll look at some of the design issues. Design issues, hopefully this would... No. Okay. All right, so design issues. Come on, down, down, down. Okay, so we are going to look at some of the design issues, things that people who implement threads or use threads have to deal with. So the first one you have to ask yourself, if you are using a thread library and fork happens, is my fork going to clone everything I have, including the threads, or is it just going to clone one of them? Right. So as far as Linux is concerned, Linux actually has, depending on the flavor, there will be multiple versions of fork. So if you check for the manual of your Linux, read the code, you may find that, oh, your Linux does one over the other. So you have to just check. So if you are implementing, just go and check from your version of Linux. Read the documentation to see which version will do. When you do a fork, will it clone all your threads, or will it just clone one of the threads? Right. But currently, a lot of Linuxes will give you two ways. The fork we did, I think, will do cloning everything. Right. So that is a design decision. If you are cloning, or if you do a fork, should you fork and make a copy of all your threads, or should you just copy one thread? Right. So that's a design decision. The second one is signal handling. So every signal we said we send, it's delivered and it's received. But if you have threads, now the question becomes, which one would do the receiving? I mean, that's mostly the question. It's almost like if we say, instead of having one lecturer, we are now going to have 4 lecturers standing here. If you ask a question, should we have a dedicated question answering lecturer who stands and will listen and answer questions? Or should it be, oh, when the question comes, any of the 4 lecturers standing up here can answer? Or should it be, there's a handler who comes and will decide which of us should handle different questions? Right. So it's the same thing. So that's the second choice. To realize that all the things that we have in real life, they just represent themselves in an OS in a different way. Right. So the first one is fork. If I'm going to clone something, do I clone everything? Or do I pick certain things to clone? Second thing, signals. If a signal comes, like if someone comes to the door right now and says, I want to speak to somebody, are we all going to say yes? Or will one person say, okay, maybe she would say, okay, I am the representative of the class. Or someone from the student will say, I am the representative. Somehow, there has to be some mechanism. So these are design choices that have to be made. Right. The next one is, if a thread is dying, thread cancellation, how is it going to be handled? Should it be, if you are dying, you should be killed immediately? Or if you are dying, should you be allowed to do some work and periodically check if you should die? Dying is not a bad case in thread. I mean, he's performing a task. Maybe he's blocking something, he's zipping something, doing a copy, running a web server. Web servers are very common. They do a lot of those. Right? So the question is, if you kill things immediately, asynchronous cancellation, that means that you will run into the issue, or potentially, where somebody has certain resources that are not properly cleared up. Right? Because maybe someone has opened the file, he didn't finish writing, and he said, die, and you just killed the thread. or maybe someone was copying something from one location to another. He started copying, you just killed him. Right? So if you kill things immediately, usually that's the danger. That some of the resources that I was working on, or maybe it asked for all this memory, UI process, he still asked for it. If you are not careful, there will be resources that will be on you that they may become almost like orphans. I think that's the technical term. These orphan resources who have no parents, yet they are hanging in your process space. Right? So the preferred is the deferred cancellation, which is as threads are running periodically, they can stop and check to see if they should die. Right? So if you've done Windows, okay, you've seen in Windows, for example, you can start a service, kill a service. You realize you right-click and say start, and you right-click and say kill. You don't immediately go and find the process ID and kill it off. Right? If you were doing that, that means that some services may not clean up properly. Maybe it was a database server, I was doing some work. Instead of sending a signal so that the database server can periodically check and say, oh, should I be dying now? Should I clean up my stuff? You just say, just delete, stop. Right? So it's nice if you can have this deferred approach. It's I would say ideal. But of course, sometimes you run into a case where something is just hogging your machine, slowing down. You just want it to die. You don't really care so much. You just said, oh, well, you've been running for a while. I know I have my files. I want you to stop. Right? So that is also a design decision, the cancellation. The last two are thread local storage. This is something that people have not thought about because most of your programming models don't have them. It's almost like before you met databases, you didn't think maybe you could send and receive data across different applications. But thread local storage refers to data that a thread can store in its own context. Right? It means it's not shared. The same way if you have a web page. If you have a PHP web page or a Java web page, from the beginning to the top, it can create certain variables, it uses them, and when it ends, that data is gone, right? Unless maybe it's stored to some database somewhere. But there are some variables that are local to what? Just that thread. It runs, it stops. After it stops or it ends, you can't go back and say, okay, what was the data the person entered? If that PHP page has already handled it and it's ended, that's it. Right? So there are some variables that are considered to be thread local storage. That means for that thread, it creates them. It's not in the function, it's just data that it can use. So you see in PHP, there are things like a session variable. The session variable is not really, how should I put it? It's not in one location per se. Right? It's a type of storage where we would say, oh, when a user is connecting, then these variables become available. It is not across all the processes. It's not every single user can see it, like the global variables in PHP. In PHP, some variables, everyone can see it. Right? But there are some variables where only the specific user who is connected can access those. So even though you have your session, I have my session, and we may all have username, for the different tasks, the username that you stored in your session is different from mine. Right? So the thread session storage or thread local storage is like that, where every thread, you can have some variables that are stored for just that thread. Right? So there are some variables that are stored in the process, everyone can access it. But there are also some variables, similar to sessions, can be tied to only a thread, meaning that the thread can have some secret information that it works with, right, that not all the threads can access. So that's a general design choice. The last thing, and this is confuses people, but it's good we raise it here, is the lightweight processes. Right. So discuss lightweight processes. I'll go here. Right. Now, if you have a many-to-many approach, right, or any approach where you have several users that want to work on kernel threads, the issue becomes, what are you going to do? So, for example, if I have something that is sending mail, something to my web server, and the mail one has finished sending, he was currently assigned to the kernel thread. Mail was running, has finished. When the mail has finished and my process can still run, how does it make sure that my whole space, so in my space I have new user threads, how does it ensure that other user threads can run if one person has stopped? Or maybe someone is opening a file. He has been opening the file for 10 minutes. Does it mean that no other user thread should run? No. The approach should be anytime something becomes available, there should be a call to the user space to ask the user program to pick someone else to run. I hope people are understanding that concept. It's almost like if we all in this class, we went to rent a nice car, like maybe a Porsche, right? and I said I'm going to the mall, I come back. It's supposed to be for an hour, but I come back in 30 minutes. It would be nice if when I come back, I say, okay, it's someone else. Go pick the Porsche and drive somewhere else that you feel happy with. Right? So it means that even though we have shared resources, it would be good if from the kernel to the user, anytime the kernel thread becomes available, it asks the user space, can you please make available someone else to run? Maybe someone has blocked. Maybe he's doing some I/O. He's no more running because what? He's opening a file and the file isn't available. He has been paused. If you don't run someone else, that means that what? You are wasting the CPU cycles. Are you understanding? Normally, the kernel would be scheduling the processes. It runs her process, its process, it keeps running. But if it's still her process, she's supposed to run. But she was running a thread that has paused for some reason. If it doesn't pick another thread from her side, that means that all the time that it's on her, maybe supposed to be with her for 1 minute, it's going to be wasted, right? Because but she could have other jobs going on. Someone or one of her threads just wanted to open a file, it blocked. But it would be sad if she wastes all her CPU cycle just because one of her threads has blocked. It's good to what? If something blocks, allow her process to pick another or nominate another thread to do some work. I hope people are understanding the concept. Is there anyone who doesn't understand the concept? This beats people every time, every exam it does. Okay. So the concept is this, right? Suppose, for example, let's use another one. Let's say we are renting out laptops, right? And this class, we've gone to rent a laptop. And I lend it to you. I say, okay, this class, currently the library has given us this laptop for today. And I give it to you. You go and work. If you finish in 3 hours, it would be nice if you don't just sit on it and you are not using the laptop anymore, right? It would be good if you come back and tell the kernel, and oh, you know what? I've only used this class's time for only 3 hours. The rest of the time, pick someone else to use it. That would be much more efficient. That means that any time a thread finishes, the kernel can say, oh, does this class have more space available? So let's pick another user to do something else, as opposed to letting it waste away. Right. So that's the concept, and I know they use a rather big term for it. Process activation. Right. There are a few big words that are used in this little section. First one is lightweight process. A lightweight process just means that what? Or virtual processor. Sorry, two different terms, but they just mean the same thing. That there's a virtual processor where you can say process 1, run this thread or run this function. Right. The only other thing that is complex here is what they call an app call notification. So the notification is where I've realized that someone has only used the resource for maybe 3 hours. So I have to notify the entire class to say, oh, you know what? Is there someone else? That's what the app call means. That means app means from the bottom, from the kernel, going up to the user space to say, oh, I have some more space to run. Can you please nominate someone? And these virtual processes, that means that even though I have real core 1, core 2, core 3, core 4, I have created these virtual processes that I can run some job in. So if you say, oh, I have a job to run, I can take it and put it in a virtual thread and then run it on your behalf. So it's just a number of things that can be, it's not a real processor, right? But a virtual processor to say, maybe your class is assigned to one laptop, so that's your virtual processor, right? And if you say, okay, I'm going to give your class 2 laptops, that's 2 virtual processors. And you can play some nice, interesting management games with it. Such as, okay, I know if I have maybe 10 laptops for real, and I say your class should get 2. As different classes are coming, I can be multiplexing in such a way that if you are not careful, you don't realize that even though the demand for laptops is about 30, I can be sharing 10 laptops, just playing that game where you come and say, oh, you want to use a laptop? Oh, according to the system, you guys deserve 2 laptops. Here you go. So we can be playing this game of renting, leasing, moving the real processor between, it's real and then what? Virtual. It's almost like what the banks are doing, not against the banks, but what happens with money. It doesn't have to all be there. There's a virtual part to it, where if you ask, and for that transaction, you need to see the cash. You see the cash. But I don't think that so not against the banks, but I don't think that all the money that you have, if everyone went to the bank right now to withdraw, we would all get our money back. Don't do that, by the way, but I don't think that's it. But the case is, there will be some amount of money that the banks will keep. right? And it knows that, oh, there's an upper limit. But it can play a game of, if you ask, I'll give to you, and people may not realize that currently, maybe, your bank doesn't have every single amount of cash that's there. Some of it is moving between banks. Some of it is traveling from one country to the other. But there's some resources that we ask for, and they'll just make sure that, at the very least, the fiscal money that's needed to flow will be moved around, and people feel, oh, okay, there's money in the system. So that's just, I think, part of banking. I may be wrong, but you can check, and we'll find a good economist or a finance, and we can argue about that. But really, not everything that is there is there. Right? It could even be like maybe the canteen. Theoretically, you may feel like everyone has a plate and a fork. Not really. When you get there, you ask, and you are given. So it's almost like it's a virtual process. You get to use it, you put it back. But the canteen, which is like the kernel, is going to manage when people come in, are given a fork in it. So everyone seems to have one. But you don't really have it. It's virtual. I hope people understand. It's not really there. You go, there's a limited number of forks and spoons and plates. But maybe as soon as you finish, sometimes it's very funny. But you ask for a fork and then they are washing one, they give it to you, and you feel oh, I was satisfied. But there aren't that many forks and spoons to satisfy everybody. And there aren't enough plates. But all they will say is for every customer that shows up, you are assigned to fork, spoon, plate. But they manage some things in the background. Right? So this part, if you have time, this is the easy explanation, but read it so that by Wednesday, this is like the last section for the trading section. Right? A lot of it is just easy reading, but this part, do pay attention to it. It's a cool idea. How kernels can make sure that it doesn't waste the CPU cycle. That means anytime there's space and someone was running, you would ask that process, oh, your threads have frozen or they are paused or they are blocked. Can you nominate someone else to run on your behalf? Right? So this is the entirety of how to run threads. Right? So I'll give you a 5-minute break. And if there's time, we'll look at just a little bit of Java code.